Canada has taken an unthinkable step. A country long considered the most reliable ally of the United States suddenly stood openly against Donald Trump and announced its support for China. This event shocked not only Washington, but the entire Western world. No one expected Canada, the closest neighbor, tied to America by a common border, economy, and history, to be the first to cross the red line. But it all began with a new tariff package. After Trump signed an executive order in early October imposing 100% tariffs on imports from Canada, including aluminum, steel, automobiles, and even timber, Ottawa faced a choice: either submit to the economic dictates of the United States or seek new allies. Canada chose the latter. According to Reuters, the decision was made under the strictest secrecy. Just a few days after the executive order was signed, a Canadian delegation flew to Beijing for urgent negotiations. Officially, the talks were on energy cooperation, but in reality, they marked the beginning of a new chapter in Canada's history. According to Bloomberg sources, China offered Ottawa a strategic partnership agreement involving long-term purchases of Canadian gas, uranium, and agricultural products in exchange for investments and access to Asian markets. The offer was too attractive to refuse. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had long balanced between Washington and Beijing, did not hesitate this time. In a national address, he stated that Canada cannot be a hostage to someone else's tariffs and will defend the interests of Canadian workers and Canadian companies. His words drew applause in Parliament but provoked outrage in the White House. Trump immediately responded in his usual style on Truth Social, saying Canada had taken advantage of the United States for years and that this would no longer happen. This time, however, the threat did not work. For the first time in its history, Canada decided to act not as a junior partner of the United States, but as an independent power. The Economist called it economic separatism, while the Financial Times described it as a quiet revolution in the North. The key moment came when Canada's foreign minister unexpectedly announced that Ottawa understands and supports China's measures in response to American tariffs. It was a diplomatic explosion. CBC News reported that behind this statement was a carefully calculated plan. In recent months, China had been seeking alternative supply routes for resources amid rising tensions with the United States, and Canada fit perfectly into this strategy. It possesses vast reserves of oil, gas, nickel, uranium, and rare earth elements, precisely the materials China needs under the pressure of US sanctions. In return, China offered Canada massive investments in the energy sector, the construction of Pacific coast ports, and credit lines through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The negotiations caused shock in Washington. According to Politico, the U.S. Secretary of State attempted to urgently contact Ottawa, but Carney declined to comment. A senior American official quoted by the Wall Street Journal said they had always considered Canada a part of them, and now it turns out it is no longer with them. For Trump, this was a personal blow. During his first term, he repeatedly said that he loved Canada, but hated how it cheated the United States. At that time, the issue was the trade deficit, but now the stakes are much higher. This is no longer just about money, but about strategic influence. Washington is losing its closest ally right on its border. The economic consequences are already being felt. The Canadian dollar strengthened, Chinese stock indexes jumped, and American markets reacted with a decline. Bloomberg reports that major Canadian corporations, from Suncor Energy to Barrick Gold, have begun talks with Chinese partners to establish joint ventures. Meanwhile, discontent is growing in the American Congress. Marco Rubio called Canada's actions a betrayal of the continent, and former White House advisor Steve Bannon declared that Trump had let the genie out of the bottle. Fox News in its evening broadcast openly accused Carney of working for Beijing, while talk show hosts began speaking of a new front in the Cold War. But while Washington speaks of betrayal, Ottawa speaks of pragmatism. Canadian analysts argue that the country is simply protecting itself. According to James Brown, an economist at the University of Calgary, Canada is tired of being dependent on the mood in the White House. Today's step is not treason, but growing up. Beijing sees this turn as a victory. In an editorial, Global Times wrote, "America tried to isolate China, but in the end, isolated itself. Even its closest neighbor is choosing the path of independence." Chinese social media exploded with the hashtag Northern Partner, which gained hundreds of millions of views. Panic began in NATO's corridors. Although Canada formally remains a member of the alliance, its new foreign policy course is causing growing distrust. According to The Guardian, Brussels is discussing the possibility of suspending Canada's access to the alliance's classified documents. Europe fears that information might leak to Beijing. Meanwhile, China-Canada relations are developing rapidly. Financial Post notes that Canada is now becoming a bridge between East and West. But behind this bridge lies an obvious threat. The United States is losing not just a partner, it is losing control over the northern energy system. For decades, Canadian resources have supplied American industry. If these flows now go to China, the energy balance of the entire continent will change. According to a leak published by Bloomberg Intelligence, Beijing offered Ottawa a multi-year contract for the supply of Canadian natural gas worth more than $200 billion. For Canada, this is not just a deal. It is the salvation of an economy damaged by tariffs. For the United States, it is a strategic blow. In the corridors of Congress, the phrase loss of influence in our own backyard is heard more and more often. Analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations write that Canada, weakened by tariffs, chose realism. It understood that in an era of global division, it is better to be with those who buy than with those who punish. Meanwhile, chaos reigns in the United States. CNN reports that emergency meetings are being held at the White House with military and economic advisors. One analyst stated bluntly, "We have lost the northern flank." Some Pentagon reports already use the term continental economic vulnerability, and in Canada, national pride is growing. Newspapers write about a new path, businesses celebrate new contracts, and public rhetoric says that for the first time in decades, we are acting on our own will. But behind all this triumph lies an obvious risk. The country has found itself on the edge of a confrontation between two giants. The Economist sums it up. China and Canada are two completely different civilizations united by one goal: to survive under pressure from the United States. It was Trump himself, in his attempt to strengthen America, who became the first person in 150 years to force its closest neighbor to seek protection in the East. Today, the whole world is watching this alliance with concern. The United States is losing trust, China is consolidating its influence, and Canada is suddenly turning into a new player in global politics. This is no longer just a diplomatic crisis. It is a turning point for the entire world architecture. In a confidential IMF report cited by Bloomberg, it is stated that if Canada and China unite their energy and industrial chains, North America could face the most significant economic shift since the Second World War. The world in which the United States dictated the rules no longer exists, and now even its closest neighbor has decided that it is time to play by its own.